I'm Asmani,
I'm Matt Ruiz.
and welcome to the You Belong in AI podcast presented by UCLA ACM Outreach. Today, we will be interviewing Chinasa Okolo. Chinasa is a third-year PhD student in computer science at Cornell University. Her work includes developing machine learning models that advances diagnosis and treatment of infectious diseases and other AI-enabled healthcare models. Much of her work has a profound impact on low-resource communities all over the world. On top of her extensive work in the AI community, she's a founder of the Diaspora Group, which advises and invests in tech startups serving the African diaspora. For fun, she composes songs, updates College Sista, a blog and community focused on succeeding in graduate school, travels the world, and updates her Twitter at Chinasa. Okay, so let's start with some education and background questions just to get to know more about you. So what were you like in high school and what were you interested in both academically and non-academically?
Sure. So I would definitely say I was, a bit nerdy in high school, somewhat reserved. I was definitely somewhat social as well. I was very involved in different, I would say not campus, but high school clubs and groups. And also I was fortunate to be able to do my last 2 years at a community college. But I also still did sports. I did dance team and also ran track. So I would say I was very well-rounded. And so in terms of my academic interests, I was definitely more interested I would say, in healthcare related things, just because, I definitely had a lot of pressure growing up to be a doctor. It's very common for immigrant families to kind of push their kids towards that area. And so that's something that kind of, even though I was pushed into it, I still, had a natural interest for it. And then additionally, I was very intrigued by the show Bones when I was growing up. So I always loved anthropology, archaeology, those kinds of fields, and especially like things just that have to do with, ancient history. And so fortunately, like I was able to kind of, pursue classes and just like, activities that were able to satisfy those interests. And then also non-academically, I kind of mentioned this before, but I was, very into athletics. I ran track all 4 years in high school. And also I did dance team for my first year in high school.
It's really cool to see that you're super well versed in everything. That's really great to be really well rounded in high school. So what led you to take college courses as a high school student, and how did you like it, and how did it prepare you for college?
Great. Yeah. So fortunately, the Kansas City Public School District, they had this program called Early College Academy. And so I think for my year, maybe we were like the third or fourth class or so. And so honestly, I just felt like it was a good opportunity to, to get more college credits for college, even though I didn't eventually like end up transferring them. But, obviously like, get more I would say intensive classes, even though I did go to, one of the best high schools in Missouri. It was just an opportunity to get off campus and learn something new. And so I would say I really love the courses just because one, I was able to take, things that weren't offered in my high school, like, medical terminology and anatomy and physiology. And also I was able to interact, with people much older than me. It was a community college that I took these courses at. And so, there's a wide range. So I would say like there are people from like 18 years old to, 50 years old. And so, just being able to, learn more about, have a non-traditional high school experience in that aspect, taught me a lot. And then I would say for preparing for college, definitely, I would say learning more about, I guess the college rigor of courses was also super helpful for me to get adjusted to that. And also I would say in terms of adjustment, I was able to maybe have it be a bit smoother just because in taking community college courses, I had a lot more free time. And so I didn't have to go to school, at 7 a.m. anymore. Like my earliest class probably started at like 9. So I was able to wake up and maybe like 8 or so and, have that bit of freedom. And then like, I wasn't stuck on campus all day. I could leave early to go to work after school. And so it was a lot more freedom and flexibility for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of college students resonate with that coming from high school. It's much more flexible. So what led you to study computer science at Pomona then for your undergraduate degree? And specifically, were you confident at the time going into CS? And if so, what makes you finally decide to go for it when you were applying to college?
Yeah, definitely. So I didn't even really know that much about computer science when I was in high school. I didn't take any courses. I took stuff like when I was little, we took like, typing courses in school and, just regular computer courses just to learn, more about just like, Microsoft Word and, all those kind of systems. But in terms of actually, programming and coding and just like, computer science in general, um, honestly, it just came to me because one, it was very popular at the time, and it still is growing, especially for undergraduate education. And so when I came into Pomona, I was set on being a science, technology, and society major. And so at that time, I thought it would be great to like blend my interests, in these fields with being able to pursue just a wide range of courses and different areas. And so from that, I would say I wasn't really able to like pursue the major just because the classes were a bit spread out. And so at the time, I knew I was going to minor in both like anthropology and CS, but I think it just worked out for me that, I would be better off majoring in computer science. And so I was able to, take a lot of different courses like sociology and anthropology. And honestly, just because, being at a liberal arts college like Pomona, affording me the ability to do that. So I was probably going to take these courses anyway. I wasn't that super confident just because I, never took a programming course, never like, programmed a line of code at all in my life before. And so actually, I did some things on like Code Academy, maybe like the semester before I actually took my first CS course. And yeah, I would say it was a interesting experience. I definitely struggled a bit in my first courses, but I grew to love it.
That's great. It's good that you have the flexibility. I actually do know about Pomona since I'm kind of from around that area, but yeah, it's a great school with a lot of flexibility for your major. So how was it growing up in like a more immigrant household in your area? And did you ever feel underrepresented in academic settings throughout high school?
So being an immigrant was very interesting, definitely balancing, life at home versus life outside of home. My siblings and we were very involved in, I would say, like extracurricular activities. And we participated in, I guess they call it extended day and also the Boys and Girls Club. And so growing up in Kansas City, in the areas that we did, we actually were exposed to people who were like, Black or like African American. And so I actually didn't really grow up around a lot of other immigrants. And I didn't actually have any, I would say, like a lot of immigrant friends or, first gen friends like me until I went to college. And so that experience, kind of gave me just a lot of insight into Black American culture, and then also I do identify with that as somewhat because I was born in the U.S. and so I never felt underrepresented in high school, fortunately, just because I actually did went to my school is considered to be a historically Black high school. It's called Lincoln College Prep, and it was the first. Was I don't know if it's the first, but it was a high school that was open to Black students because there weren't any other high schools that were open at that time. And it's actually as you can tell by the name, named after President Abraham Lincoln. And so it's just the school has a lot of history. It's founded in 1865, if I remember. And I found out recently that it's actually older than like both Pomona and Cornell. So yeah, that's something that is super interesting. Like gives me a lot of pride.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Actually, I think it's a really good opportunity. So I guess then transitioning to your college, then how was the representation there in terms of both like immigrant representation and then also Black representation?
Yeah, so for me, I would say in terms of immigrant representation, it's kind of hard to tell, but I know a lot of people that I hung out with were either like, first gen or maybe like came to the States when they were younger. And so, and honestly, excuse me, honestly, they were like from a lot of different countries. And so I was able to get, I would say a wider breadth of experience, with people from different kinds of immigrant backgrounds. And honestly, when I was in college, I did tend to stick to, I would say my primary friend group was definitely Black. All of us were either like, Black American or like Haitian American or Nigerian American. So I felt like insulated in this community a little bit. And also, fortunately, the 5Cs or the Claremont colleges, you can like go to different campuses. I was able to like take courses and like eat meals and all that stuff. And so I had like a wider community than just at Pomona. And I would say out of all the colleges, I think Pomona is the most diverse. So honestly, even though the Black representation was definitely a bit low, there was just a strong community of Black students across the colleges that I didn't really feel super underrepresented, just I would say in general, but definitely in the computer science department. I remember that I was the only Black woman to graduate in my year, and I think I was either the third or the fourth Black woman to graduate from it with a computer science degree or from the computer science department in general. And so definitely, trying to navigate that was a bit hard because I didn't have really anyone like directly, I would say, ahead of me to kind of consult with. I was able to talk to some Black women, but they had graduated by the time, I was like really like getting into computer science and all that, or, yeah. And so that was definitely a bit tough, but fortunately, I would say like the underrepresented students in our department were very, great and formative communities. So we were able to, pursue projects together, work on class assignments, and also just, go to conferences together. And also, I would say the department did a great job. I want to shout out one of my favorite professors, Professor Chen. She was super awesome and helping like to organize, I would say, like the diversity conferences. And so helping to organize like Grace Hopper and more specifically like Tapia, which, is very popular for diverse students in CS to attend. It's a conference, so yeah.
Well, that's great to hear that you had some great role models to look up to. So I'll have Matt take over and ask you some more questions about your PhD life.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a great experience at the Claremont colleges, like you said. But after you graduated, what made you decide to, pursue a graduate degree in computer science and eventually like move across the country to Cornell?
Yeah, so I would say it was definitely a bit of a journey. So when I came into, undergrad, I obviously didn't know that was going to end up with a computer science degree. But I think along the way, like I always knew that I wanted to go to graduate school, either in like, computational biology or like bioinformatics. And so that was always, on the tip of my mind. And so fortunately, I was able to get more experience in, the things that you need to do to prepare for graduate school, like research through these, research programs that I did in the summers called RU programs. And so, or research experience for undergraduates, and they're sponsored by the NSF. And so they allow you to get research experience at a university that's probably not like, your home institution. And then also like you get mentoring from graduate students and also faculty members and kind of learn about, the processes of applying to and like, staying in graduate school. And so those programs are super helpful for me wanting to pursue a degree. And then also, I would say just learning more about like, how computer science could advance healthcare and, not, kind of diverting from my dream of actually becoming a medical doctor. I felt that I would still be able to kind of pursue, some of these goals by, going to graduate school and conducting research in these areas.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Then I guess just like a small follow-up question, but how
No
difficult,
worries.
if any difficulties, was it moving from, California to New York, given like the weather differences and like how was it adjusting to Ithaca in general?
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely a big adjustment. And honestly, I did feel a bit spoiled, being in Southern California for 4 years. But honestly, fortunately, I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. We get all four seasons, and sometimes the winters can be somewhat harsh. So I was somewhat prepared, but definitely not all the way prepared. Because the winters in Ithaca are definitely no joke, especially this year. And so honestly, I definitely miss California a lot, but I'm getting used to Ithaca, even though I'm still getting used to Ithaca. I'm even in my third year.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I know it could be tough, like the weather transition for a lot of people, but glad to hear that
Mm.
you're doing well with it. I know you mentioned that you've been involved with like a lot of different communities, from your when you were in high school and even your undergraduate. They've all been very
Mm.
different, but how does it compare to the community of PhD students that are at Cornell currently?
Honestly, I would say grad school is so different from undergrad. Everybody is kind of decentralized, and also I'm just at being at a larger institution, even more so. So I would say in grad school can definitely be a bit harder to form communities or community if you're not really intentional about it. And so I would say my graduate program, or the computer science department, and also the information science department, I would say we've done a really good job in forming community. So pre-COVID, of course, we had social hours. We had, different seminars every weekend. People would go out after social hours to kind of go to bars and like hang out. And so I think that's something that also attracted me to the department in the first place. And so it's really great to have that. And so for me, I've also been intentional informing community outside of the department, especially, with, I would say, affinity groups like, the Black Graduate and Professional Student Organization. I served on the e-board for a year or so, and also just have been engaged in activities, and also like hang out with a couple people from that group. Then also I was involved in the Graduate Society of Women Engineers, which is also a great community to hang out with and just, be connected with people outside of the department. And I've actually engaged in like a couple of undergraduate groups as well. Specifically, like those kind of focus more on maybe like professional development and also like doing work, volunteer work on the African continent or targeted towards, Black communities. So that's something I've engaged in as well.
Yeah, it sounds great the way you've been able to like get yourself involved. I know it could be difficult for incoming students. So another like question similar, I know you touched upon it a little bit, but how has PhD life changed with the pandemic, with academics or like your research or even socially?
Yeah, so fortunately, being a computer science PhD student, you can honestly like do your work from anywhere as long as you have, a computer and a working internet connection. So that I've been fortunate to not really have any delays in some of my work. But honestly, there is a part of my research that has kind of suffered a bit. And so it's kind of unconventional for computer scientists to do so, but actually engage in field work and more, I would say, like qualitative work. Just because one aspect of my research kind of focuses on, understanding how people understand and perceive AI. And so I actually did a virtual field study in India last summer, and I was actually supposed to be there in Bangalore, but obviously, the complications, from COVID, prevented that. So that's one aspect of my research that's suffered a little bit, but we were still able to get stuff done and, get those study written up and analyzed. And fortunately, the paper was accepted at CHI, last year. And so I'm very happy about that. But I definitely miss, in terms of like in-person PhD life, being in my office. Cornell's fortunate to have, a lot of great donors. Our building is named after Bill and Melinda Gates. They donated a lot of money to create a nice building. And so like the office is super nice. I have a view over like the baseball field, and I can see like the sunsets and all that stuff. Ithaca has like really beautiful sunsets. And so miss being in my office and, walking by and like seeing friends in the hallway and, catching up. So definitely that's one thing I miss a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure it's difficult to not be able to like see friends in the hallways when it comes to like day to day, but also congratulations on your research paper.
Oh, thank you so much.
For getting accepted. Then I guess on the topic of research, I know you've engaged in many research projects at Cornell, Pomona, and some other universities, but which research project really stands out to you and like in terms of like enjoyment and just fulfillment in general?
So yeah, all of them have like a special place for me. But I would definitely say the research I did at Columbia University, it was after my sophomore year in undergrad. And so it was very interesting because I didn't get the chance to work directly with rhesus monkeys, but the research lab I was in, it was a neuroscience lab. We were actually situated at Columbia Medical School, the medical center. And so it was very interesting because I was able to learn more about like eye tracking and also work with hardware to, develop different tasks to kind of, I would say, estimate and learn about human perception. And so I think the coolest part was that I was actually able to like go into the lab where the postdoc I was working with was, directly working with the monkeys and like fitting their heads with, I would say like the tracking devices. And so that was like super interesting. And also just, being in New York is very interesting. It was great to be there for summer and be in a cohort with other, students who were, actively engaged in like different areas of medical research. And I think I was the only computer science student there. So definitely stood out a bit, but I had a really great experience there.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing experience. Yeah, and anything to do in New York and also like with the research that you talked about sounds really great. Okay, we're gonna be moving on to our next section. It's a new section we're adding. It's called 10 epochs. It's kind of like a rapid fire, not trivia, but question about you.
Yeah.
I put in quotes serious questions, but they're meant to be lighthearted. But feel free to pass on any of these. But yeah, I'll start with the first one. What's your favorite programming language?
Definitely MATLAB. It's very unconventional, but it was one of the first languages I really, did a lot of work in. And so I just really find it easy to conceptualize better than like other languages like Java and Python. So yeah, MATLAB has a space in my heart.
Cool, cool. The infamous question, Emacs or Vim, or neither?
Honestly, I really hate Vim, but like it was the first, I guess, I don't know what to call it, but I had to use it a lot in undergrad, so I had to learn how to use it. So
All right, sounds good, sounds good. Then across all your computer science courses that you've taken, which one has been your favorite?
I would definitely say it was a human computer interaction course I took during my senior year at Pomona. I actually ended up doing research with the professor who taught this course, Alexandra Papuzaki. And so I really enjoyed, learning more about, I would say like, it's not non-traditional areas of computer science, but, just things that are not super technical. And so this, taking this course and, being engaged with research with the professor, helped shape a lot of my research interests today. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one.
Then what's your favorite hobby outside of work?
I would say pre-COVID, traveling, but now I would say just going on social media.
Then TensorFlow or Pytorch?
Definitely TensorFlow. I have a couple lab mates who are trying to push me towards Pytorch because it's much more efficient. But yeah, TensorFlow is just easier for me to use at the moment. But yeah.
Yeah, stick to your roots. Then person in the AI community that you admire the most?
So I would say it's like a set of people, but I definitely want to highlight Timnit Gebru and Redi Ebebe. And so I've been fortunate to meet and work with both. And so definitely have been inspired by them for years. And fortunately, Redi, did graduate from Cornell recently, and she's been a mentor to me like since I've, been at Cornell and also like after she's graduated. So yeah, very fortunate to know both of them and, have them in my life.
Yeah, it's amazing. Then which one do you think is cooler, reinforcement learning or generative modeling?
I would definitely say generative modeling, just because, there are a lot of cool things I see being done with it, especially in terms of like the art space and the art world. And so, yeah, I really enjoy applications, that are kind of non-traditional. So yeah.
Yeah, same here. Then California and New York.
Definitely California, no question.
Okay, then favorite AI or ML conference to attend?
So I haven't really been to that many in person. I guess COVID kind of helped me attend more, but I've been to NeurIPS a lot. And honestly, that was due to, being able to go to the Black and AI workshop there. And so it's such a great community, and, being able to see other Black researchers from around the world has inspired me a lot. And just, they've been in really great places, or somewhat great. It's always in December, but yeah, so I would say definitely NeurIPS.
Then lastly, Jupyter Notebooks or Google Colabs?
Ooh, yeah, this is kind of hard actually. I would say Google Colabs. It's a bit more easier to use, and also I think a bit more functional than Jupyter. You don't have to have, your own like GPU setup to run. So Google Colab kind of democratizes access to machine learning, which I like a lot.
Cool, cool. Yeah, that's the end of this segment. Thank you for answering those questions. But we'll
Yeah,
be
no
moving
worries.
on to the next segment, which Alva will be taking over.
That was a lot of fun to hear. Actually, I really loved that segment. So now we're going to go into more professional involvement and publications. So first question, many students are always keen on landing internships with big tech companies. So how did you land your research internship with Microsoft, and what was that process like?
Oh yeah, definitely. So yeah, I can be pretty transparent with this. And so Microsoft Research, they actually have a program geared at getting undergraduates engaged in research, which is awesome. And so when I was an undergrad, I actually never did any kind of like software engineer internships at all. I actually had an offer at Intel one summer, but just chose to do research at Carnegie Mellon instead. And so being able to pursue research in an industry setting was very appealing to me. And so with this program geared towards undergraduates, you just apply like normal. You have to get like recommendation letters. And so from there, you, interview, and then you get like placed at an office. And so it just happened that I guess like with my skill set and background, like in, doing research in computational biology and computational neuroscience, a lab at, Microsoft Research in Cambridge, England was super interested in my work. And it was actually the only lab I ended up interviewing with. And so obviously, I wanted the chance, travel a bit more and get out of the US, before coming back, for graduate school. So I'm just decided to take it and go from there. So for me, it was pretty straightforward: application, interview, placement. So yeah.
And then, so what was it like being a Microsoft intern? And can you give like a little bit of a rundown for your schedule? Like, what was the intern culture like? You know, any funny stories from that experience?
Yeah, definitely. So just to start, I want to say that especially in terms of like the research area of Microsoft, or yeah, it's very different from, the typical like tech industry role that you would have as like a software engineer, intern. And so I feel like the perks, honestly, you don't really get that much, compared to the other traditional roles. But it was so fun, just to, be outside the US. And so in terms of free stuff, we get like hoodies, backpacks, water bottles, I think like occasionally like snacks and stuff. And yeah, that was great. And then also in terms of the intern culture, I feel like it was kind of hard to kind of tell who was interns and stuff, just because at their research level, there tend to be a lot of PhD interns. And so like they can kind of, cross for, like full-time employees. But fortunately, I was able to find like, like people who are actually like just about to enter their PhD programs like me. So we were able to, eat lunch together and also like plan trips and stuff, I guess like outside the UK. And also out the Microsoft Research Cambridge, they do a really good job in, trying to plan events for interns. And so I remember like on I guess my second to last day of my internship, we were able to go to like a go-kart like racing track, which was really fun, and also do some other activities like throughout the summer as well. And in terms of my daily schedule, I would say that it really depended, but it was pretty straightforward. So I would get in the office maybe around like 9 to 10 or so, and then just kind of review what I needed to do for the day. And then let's see, get started on my project. And then probably like throughout the day, have, different meetings with my research supervisor, and then also like his supervisor, who was like the lead for the group I was in. Also, the group I was in is called Biological Computation. And so it was very interesting because I think at the time it was the only lab at Microsoft that had a wet lab, in terms of like biology and like chemistry and all that stuff. And so it was super interesting. And I was able to do like, I would say I was able to do work that I probably wouldn't have been able to do at like another company. So it was very cool. And so going back to my schedule from there, like, I had different meetings with people. And then also at the end of the day, I would usually like go down to the gym and work out and then just like go home. And so I honestly think like the coolest thing about being there was that we got bikes, because I guess in Cambridge, it's a very academic town. And, I think it's very common for people to ride bikes. So this is my first time like riding a bike full time. So like Microsoft, they paid for, all the interns to get a bike rental for like the time they were there. And so, yeah, that was one thing I also really enjoyed. And then like being in the UK, honestly, I mean, it wasn't really super, super different to me. Like, honestly, there is a different culture, but I guess the biggest thing I had to get adjusted to was, driving or like walking or biking down the left side of the street instead of, the opposite way. But I got used to that pretty quickly. And yeah, so it wasn't, yeah, anything like super weird or stuff, but yeah, it was nice.
That's great to hear. And then, so when you were working at like a big tech company or interning there,
Mm-hmm.
what did you like about it and what did you dislike about it?
Cool. So I would definitely say just the amount of like, I guess the different kinds of people that you can find at Microsoft Research, especially in, at Cambridge, there's so much diversity in terms of like what they're actually doing. And so if I recall correctly, at MSR Cambridge, I think each floor is kind of like dedicated to a different group. And then like within the floors, they have different wings and stuff. So, you had people working on, biological computation on my floor, and then, just like, systems engineering or, programming languages or, healthcare applications. And so being able to like, see and meet like with other people to kind of learn about what they're doing, was very interesting. Also, and honestly, like being at a big tech company, the pay is great. And so that was something that kind of differed a lot, from the traditional like research internships I did at universities and undergrad. So that's something I really enjoyed as well. And then in terms of like what I did dislike, honestly, it's really hard to say. Like, I think I just enjoyed being there and, like having a great time. So I couldn't really think of anything I disliked at the moment.
That's awesome. That's good that you got like a lot of the benefits of that big tech company. So tell us about your work with more low resource diagnostic health monitoring, and why do you think that health monitoring in Africa is so important to you?
Great. Yeah. So this is, I've been working on a couple of projects for a while, but I haven't been able, to work directly on the continent yet. But my goal is to, work there in the long term. And so my work right now is trying to optimize methods to improve how different respiratory functions or symptoms are diagnosed or detected by computer vision systems. And so I would say this is very important just because in a lot of regions, throughout the global south and also in sub-Saharan Africa specifically, the healthcare systems, aren't really, I would say, well built. And so, they rely on a lot of, I would say, informal healthcare, that's done by community health workers like NGOs. And so and also there's a lack of specialized doctors, and so using technology can kind of augment, this lack of doctors and also just like healthcare in general to help improve, the detection, diagnosis, and also like treatment of diseases. And so that's something that's super important to me. And then also, as being someone who I consider myself to be Nigerian, even though I was born in America. And when I was growing up, I heard a lot about, the different healthcare issues that my parents faced, and also like that, their siblings, faced and also like family members who were back home in Nigeria faced and continue to face. And so that's something that, like became very kind of, I'd say important to me and stuck with me as I, have gone throughout my research journey. So I wanted to do something that would directly have an impact in this space.
It's awesome. And it's obviously very useful, and it's great that you're doing this kind of stuff. So what are some of the difficulties? You talked a lot about, the getting access to that AI, but are there any difficulties of deploying this AI in the low resource areas?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing that comes to mind is just infrastructure. And even, without thinking about, I would say, technological capacity, there are things like, roads and stuff that are not well built out. There are things, like hospitals and clinics that are not built out. And then also just in terms of, I would say, technical infrastructure, like, Wi-Fi or, let me say just like internet. And also just like telecommunications infrastructure can be lacking in some areas. And so if you're building devices, that kind of rely on the cloud, it may not be possible to deploy them in these kinds of regions. And then also thinking about if you're working with, you're working with different kinds of devices. And so since electricity may be a problem, people cannot rely on, big equipment that, needs to be plugged in and like, on 24/7. And so a lot of machine learning models at the moment are kind of developed and trained on large GPUs, and so that's not really possible just because they take up a lot of electricity, and it's just not feasible to move them from these large like expensive computers with all this kind of fancy hardware to small phones. That's a difficulty I see.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Those are some great points, definitely. And so are there any other, I guess, like AI regulation barriers that you might have to get to in deploying in some of the areas that you're interested in?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of regulation, I think I've done a little bit of research into looking at this, but obviously in most of Africa or like even throughout the global south, there isn't regulation for AI or even, technologies that, are focused on e-health or like, e-medicine. And so it can kind of be hard to determine what you can actually do with AI and, how this will be kind of governed or regulated. And so I would say that there's a lot of room for this to be improved. I know that, there are people at the UN and other, organizations that are working closely on developing, general AI regulations. But at the moment, I don't see anything specific towards these regions, except for in larger countries like Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. But yeah, it's like, very scarce.
I see. Okay, cool. So then what are, I know that privacy and security is something that you're also interested in. So what are some barriers in the privacy and security realm in deploying any AI-based healthcare models?
Yeah, definitely. So first off, obviously, there are like technological needs that need to be considered. So, you have to, have, I would say, databases that are secure and, that, obviously can store, these data, this kind of data. Yeah, I think that's very important. And then also going back to regulation, HIPAA is a big one in the US. I'm not familiar with like what it's called in like the EU and the UK, but they also have like their different, privacy regulations when it comes to healthcare data. So obviously, like following that is the biggest thing as well. And also one thing that some people don't consider in terms of privacy and security, people don't really think about these issues the same, in different regions of the world. So, for example, kind of referencing the study that I did last summer virtually in India, is that it's very common, for people when they go to hospital visits, is that they're in a crowded area, they may be actually like have multiple people in a doctor visit room. And so, you may not necessarily like, have enough privacy when you're like, having visits with doctors. So something else that we also found from the study, like in regards to like privacy and security, sometimes, the healthcare workers who manage these devices, they actually share them, with other family members. And so, sometimes like, we had stories of, data getting deleted by a child who was playing on a phone, or also just like, these community health workers having to like rely on their husbands to transmit information for them. So you just really have to consider, I would say, like the regional and also cultural differences when it comes to both like privacy and security.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely something I never thought about, was the cultural respects of that. But that's a great point. I guess the next question that we want to go to is regarding your research that you did with AI-based facial recognition. So AI-based facial recognition can often be used by authorities to find criminals and use it in other legal settings too. So what do you think are some issues with the modern AI facial recognition?
Honestly, there are a lot of issues. And for me, I think it's really just the intent of deploying these models in the first place. And so we see that a lot of, these tools are being used, for policing, for surveillance, and also, I guess, just for, things that really don't make any sense to me, like emotion recognition or kind of like ethnicity recognition, which is super hard to do, even, from just like being a human trying to do these things. And so I think those are the main issues that I see. And obviously, a lot of great work has been done in this area. And I would say it's definitely spearheaded by, Joy Bulamwini and Timna Gebru, and also Deb Raji, who, they obviously, spearheaded the great study, Gender Shades. And so we've been able to see a lot more, I would say, like outcry against these technologies. But for me, I would say it's just, the intent of deploying them in the first place.
I see. Yeah, definitely. And then, so why do you think that it's important for data sets that we use to train AI facial recognition models to be more diverse and accurate?
I think the most important part is not, using AI to exacerbate existing racial inequalities or inequity. And so we see that, in policing, Black and brown people, especially Black people, have, been disproportionately affected by, issues that come, that come with policing, in their communities, around the US and even outside of the US as well. And so ensuring that, these recognition models have incorporate and use data sets that are both diverse and accurate can kind of, help in reducing this, and also just ensuring that, people aren't wrongly arrested, based on, mug shots that incorrectly match them, which has happened a couple of times actually, even within the past year. So I feel like if this doesn't happen, then we're going to continue to see like AI kind of evolve on its own to be, evolve into, a monster that can be worse than like the existing like, systems that, have already, hurt people for centuries.
Yeah, of course, definitely. So thank you so much for talking about your research. We're going to go on to Matt to talk more about your outreach and mentoring that you've been doing a lot.
Yeah, so like Ava said, you've been involved with mentoring through many different outlets, Black and AI, and even at Cornell. Why is mentoring so important to you? And what's some common advice that you give to your mentees?
Sure. So I would definitely say mentoring is important to me just because I've basically been mentored all my life, and especially like going into CS and AI in particular, I've been, very fortunate to have mentors who've been able to, help me through the graduate application process, and even just like, my research, and then also just, trying to survive as a graduate student. So I feel like giving back is, the best way for me to pay back, all the people who have helped me get to where I am today. And so in terms of common advice I would give to mentees going through CS or AI, I think it's just forming communities is really the best way, or, forming support groups is the best way just to get through this, just because I noticed, like, even when I was an undergrad, that a lot of the people that, were doing well in their courses, they had, siblings or friends who actually like took these TS courses before them and were able to like help them out. And so, being, the first underrepresented students in, CS or like AI, you may not necessarily like have these groups or, friends to call on or like siblings to call on who kind of know these things already. So doing your best to form communities will help you along the way. And also I would say, fortunately, and also like unfortunately, it kind of took, the events that that transpired last summer, the killing of George Floyd, and also like Breonna Taylor, for people to understand, the importance of diversity, not only in just, daily life, but also like we've seen a lot of movements form in academia as well. And so I think that, students who continue to come through these pipelines, especially underrepresented students, will be, even more supported.
Yeah, that's great advice. Moving on to the next question. So you not only been involved with mentoring in the US, but you've also been involved with CS mentoring and teaching like abroad with Code Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about your work there and why you think the US needs to expand a little bit, outreach beyond the borders?
Yeah, definitely. So I really loved my experience with Code Afrique, and I believe that I had a great time in Ghana last January. And so I really wish I could do it again, and hopefully I will in the future. Talking about a bit of my work there. So we went to Ghana in January of 2020. And so we were fortunate to have connections, in Ghana already. And so just to give you all some background on Code Afrique, it was started by some undergraduate students at Cornell. They since graduated, but they actually are from Ghana. They were both computer science majors and, were able to get, very, I would say, like good roles after graduation. And they kind of wanted to pay this back. And so they connected with two professors in the CS department, and who were able to get support from like different, I would say, organizations, including the Association for Computing Machinery, the ACM, which was awesome. And also other like, I guess, big tech companies as well. So they started, I think their first workshops were in 2019 in Ghana, if I recall. And then in 2020, they did workshops in Eswatini, it used to be called Swaziland, and then also in Ghana. And so I was on the Ghana part. And so our program consisted, it was like a couple of days or so. And so what we did was that we created a curriculum to teach, I would say, secondary school students introductory CS techniques. And so I would say, like, we spent the first couple of days teaching this curriculum to the students, and then on the last day, they would actually like use what they learned to participate in the hackathon, and then we would like give out prizes and stuff after that. And so I felt like it was super impactful for me, just because, coming, descending, from West Africa, and also just seeing, how technology has the power to empower, students, and also provide them with a one-off, first, I would say, a better way of living, because people, once you have like digital technology skills and even like coding skills, you're able to access higher paying jobs, and support your family a bit more than like other traditional industries on the continent. And then again, I think it's just important in definitely going back to AI, improving representation in AI, because one, we see that a lot of these systems that are biased towards underrepresented people, they're not really developed by us. And so I think that's one way that the pipeline can be improved. And so this kind of goes into the next part about the US needing to expand outreach initiatives. In general, I think that it's hard to talk about like the US as a whole, but I know that a lot of tech companies have been doing, I would say, decent jobs in improving their footprints in the global South, and also like I would say in Africa specifically. And so I know that like IBM Research, they've had offices in Nairobi and South Johannesburg for years. And then also Google launched their first AI lab in Accra. I would say 2 years ago or so. And so I think that is a great way that they've been able to kind of improve the representation of both, technical, I would say technical talent on the continent, and also just like AI talent, which will definitely have a great impact in the future.
Yeah, that's very cool. Starting with the organization you're a part of, that's amazing, the work that your team has been doing. And just your valid points about the tech companies, I'm glad you have a positive outlook on what they're doing. And it sounds like they're doing a really good job. So going on to the next section, I'm going to pass it off to Ava to talk about future representation in AI.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about how representation of AI has improved, but just to go a little bit more in depth, why do you believe that representation is important, especially in AI? And a little bit more adding on to what you've already said, but do you think representation has improved in the field over the past couple of years?
So as we've seen so far, AI has, a lot of potential to shape industries, and is already, changing industries, throughout the world in a variety of ways. I think it's important for underrepresented people not only to be involved in the, development of these kind of systems, but to also impact, how these systems benefit people as well. Because already, as I've stated before, we've seen that there have been a lot of negative consequences that have resulted from the deployment and use of AI systems. But I believe that incorporating representation, diverse representation, will improve the impacts of this, and also just ensure that communities are not negatively impacted by these respective technologies. And then also, in terms of representation, I would definitely say it's improved over the past few years, but I definitely think we have a long way to go. And it's not even just pointing out AI in particular, even the field of computer science. I don't know the numbers at the moment, but I know that underrepresented representation is super low. Also, representation from Black students, researchers, and professionals is still very low. At tech companies and also at research universities or institutions. Fortunately, there have been a lot of initiatives, I would say by Black in AI, which is one of them who's been doing a great job in improving global representation, just because they do focus on a lot of people from the African continent and helping them get to graduate school. And then also, I would say, I know the NSF recently launched a program to help underrepresented students transition into PhD programs in computer science. And so I think that as long as people, take an intentional approach into improving, representation in CS, and then I think that this will also have a follow-on effect in AI.
Yeah, those are definitely great points. And I also agree with you that, there's still some ways to go. What do you think the AI and tech community can do to improve more on having underrepresented people come more into the tech space?
There's a lot of things first, but honestly, I think it begins by kind of evaluating their systems, or their systems in place that maybe have excluded, either intentionally or unintentionally excluded, people from underrepresented backgrounds into different kinds of roles at their companies, or even in their graduate school processes. And so I think from there, then people can actually realize the harm that they have done, and then can kind of get a picture on how to on things that they can do to improve this. And so I think reflection is obviously the first step. I think the next step is honestly partnering with organizations who have already been kind of involved in this. And so there's honestly a trend for people to kind of take on, I would say, diversity and equity, or inclusion initiatives on their own, without actually understanding, the factors that kind of impact this, and also, the different nuances that occur in this space. And so, seeing, universities, for example, seeing universities partner with Back in AI to offer, admissions waivers is something that I find to be helpful. And then also just departments like mine at Cornell, who have actually established diversity offices to kind of, and also bringing in people who are familiar with these issues are first step. And I know that diversity officer roles have been a thing at some tech companies for a while now, and so just doing their best to work with these institutions will be great in improving our representation in the tech space.
Definitely, yeah. Those are really, really great suggestions. So if anyone's listening, take them. So what is your message to youth from these underrepresented groups interested in AI? And what advice could you possibly give them about getting involved if they don't know where to start?
Sure. So definitely, I always encourage people to kind of reach out to role models that you see who are kind of doing the things that you want to do. And so I'm always open to telling people more about how they can get involved in AI, or just even mentoring people. I've been fortunate to mentor a couple of people who've been able to get into good graduate schools, and also, or just different tech roles and stuff. And so I love doing that.
So thank you so much for answering some really great questions that I'm sure a lot of youth in AI would love to hear and is very helpful to them. So we're going to move on to Matt to ask you just a couple of concluding questions.
So we know you love to travel. It's one of your hobbies that you love to do before COVID. Do you have any cool stories or any cool places you've been to?
Yeah, so I would say the most interesting place I've been to so far has definitely been Budapest. And so I actually lived there for a couple of months because I did study abroad there. And so it was actually my first time like traveling out the country alone and living in an apartment. And so yeah, it was a super cool experience that I had, and I really treasure it to this day.
Cool. Yeah. Then I guess another hobby related question, but are there any like personal projects or hobbies that you've been meaning to do, but just haven't found the time to do yet?
I've been kind of dabbling in it already, but I'm super interested in, using entrepreneurship to improve, I guess, like livelihoods for people that are either on the African continent or interested in like returning back to the African continent. And so, fortunately, like Cornell has a very strong entrepreneurial ecosystem here, and so I've been able to like take courses and also like do different programs. And so, my long-term goal is to definitely be involved in the entrepreneurial space and also like in venture capital of some sort. So that's something I really would love to, open up a firm one day somewhere on the continent and, just help founders grow and also just like support them with funding. So
Yeah, that's an amazing project. I love that. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of You Belong in AI. This episode was made possible by UCLA ACM AI Outreach. Again, my name is Matt Ruiz, and I was co-hosted today with Ava Asmani, and our guest was Chinasa Okolo, a third-year PhD student at Cornell University. This episode was edited by Kai Toda and Jason Jewick, and the music is by Kevin McLeod, and it is called Cherry Monday.
you belong in AI.